So about a couple of weeks ago, I had a computer that I picked up. I'll post a link to the video where pretty much I paid $500 for i7 9700K, RTX 2080, 1 TB hard drive, NVMe, all that good stuff with a really cool case on it. And the $500 was pretty much to bond somebody out of jail. Well, yeah. And from there, the RTX 2080 is gone. The case is gone. Built a computer out of it. That's gone. Because of that, it awarded me the opportunity to sell my test bench for a pretty steal of a deal. Well, good deal. And a custom build. So that's gone. So what I'm saying is that for the right price, I'll pretty much just sell about anything. Except this. I would not really ever want to sell this or kind of wish this upon anybody. Let's talk about it. So inside that iBuyPower computer, like I said, it had a 9700K, which that's pretty interesting, and it had this motherboard. As you can see, it's an Asus motherboard because it has that whole gamers logo, right? It says mainboard. It's good to know. It's the G15CX main BD mainboard. It's an MATX motherboard. It's got okay I/O provision, 2, 4, 6, 8 USBs, you know, the combination of the fast ones and the slow ones. Ethernet, the whole sound thing, yeah. Has that DIM.2 thing, provisions for both. It's got the whole LED for the RGB actions. Yeah. A kind of Wi-Fi thing going on over here, so that's kind of pretty cool. And then there's other things. Oh yeah, can't forget 2 DDR4 slots, and we'll talk more about the specifics in a second. Has this Mickey Mouse heatsink right over here, which, okay. Has these heat sinks for the VRMs, which that kind of moves a lot. This one too, so okay. Has 8 SATA ports in the front, and that's pretty much about it. You know, you got the whole addressable RGB stuff over here. 1, 2, 3 fan headers. Whoop, there's 4 over here. You know, your USB 2, and that's all you pretty much get with it. You don't even get the whole USB, you know, 3.1 action going on over here. So yeah. Now, one thing about this motherboard is that it's pretty much weak sauce, and we're going to talk all about that in a second. So any K series Intel, you're able to overclock. You have a decent motherboard, you can do some pretty cool overclocking with it, but they're going to put a K series in this motherboard, and as you'll see when we look into the BIOS, this motherboard really doesn't have any good provisions for overclocking, in my opinion. And also, if you look at, like I said, the VRMs and this type of heatsink, yeah, it looks like it could be toasty. This motherboard was specifically meant for pre-built, and I guess it was made by Asus. Asus put it into RG gaming ones. This is a Z390 motherboard, and those computers would cost about $1,800, $1,900 with a 9700K and a RTX 2080. iBuyPower put a few of these in their computers. A whole bunch of different companies actually use this motherboard for their builds. But then it's like you spent almost $2,000 on a build and you get this type of motherboard. So because I don't really trust this motherboard and the limited features, and it pretty much is a hot motherboard, which we'll talk about that when we get into the BIOS. It's going to work great for my test bench, because in my test bench, all I pretty much do is test video cards, memory, and just little different things I have going on here and there, but that's about it. So I don't need anything fancy. But as far as putting it in a client's build, yeah, I really would not want to do that. So I don't have the 9700K anymore, as that sold. Like I said, good price, gotta go. But I do have an i7 8700K, so yeah, that's pretty decent over here. We're gonna pop in some memory. This is my G-Skill Ripjaws. These are rated at 3600, which that's another interesting thing. The memory for this is only rated at 2666. So you're gonna put a 9700K, but you have a memory that's only what's limited to 2666. That's kind of not good. All right, now the cooler I'm going to use for this, and like I said, this is just a test bench. This ain't for nothing serious, and definitely no overclocking with this over here. I'm going to use the Scythe 3 cooler. I got to say, guys, this is a pretty awesome cooler, and yes, this video is more focused on this motherboard, but just talking about this, 105 watt TDP, great for small ITX builds. And what I like about it is if you look right over here on the side, you got some decent room for memory. Now Now, like the G Skill and that Corsair memory, which taller with the whole RGB goodness going on over here, it will block into it. So kind of have to keep that in mind. But for this G Skill over here, it works pretty good. And yeah, 105 watt TDP, 1800 RPM fan. So I like it. So now this is, according to their website, supposed to be a copper base plate. But considering that it is plated, if you were to use liquid metal with this, which why would you want to use it for this type of build, you probably get some staining action going on in it. So just kind of keep that in mind. If you're going to need a low profile cooler, this one's actually pretty good. I like it. And for the price, for $40 is what they're going for on Amazon. Definitely something to consider. I like these scythe coolers. I definitely like their black and gray aesthetic on it. So yeah, definitely something to consider if you guys are looking for a low budget cooler. Their bigger ones look real nice too as well. Now, when you install this cooler, make sure you keep mindful of this orientation. Like I said, the indent over here is where it has to go for the memory, so you have that clearance. And the way you attach it is, if you move these fans, you'll see a hole right over here and a hole right over here. Phillips head screws. So just go ahead and screw it in, one side each, and we should be good to go. So now for our storage drive, we're going to use the NVMe over here. This is one from XPG. It actually came with that iBuy pre-built. It also has the whole 16 gigs of Intel Optane thing, which is kind of non-existent, really. I mean, not really used. And so yeah, if you guys wanted me to do a performance or kind of talk about the whole Optane thing, definitely chime down below and we'll definitely look into it. So now let's go ahead and mount this into my lovely test bench. Now, I did do a separate video on this test bench and kind of setting it up. Months later, I got to say it's a love-hate relationship. I enjoy it because of the size and the convenience, but lining up the little mounting screws is kind of fun sometimes. All right, so now this bench does have the provisions that if I wanted to, I could loosen this up and just kind of slide this up and just give it more support right over here, but this is just a test bench. I'm not too worried about that. And if I was really going for aesthetic, I would actually take this fan off and just flip it around to just kind of tuck this wire away and make it look good. But like I said, it's just a test bench. I ain't trying to impress nobody with this one. Alright, so we're into the BIOS. And as you can see, the BIOS revision is a little old. So I did look it up. Asus does have a newer BIOS, which is 303. I have 302 running, 8700K. And our memory is only showing at 2133. So hopefully there should be a way to enable XMP so we can at least get 2666. Now, looking at the BIOS, as you can see, this is pretty much it. We got the Republic of Gamers logo, and yeah. So now let's go ahead and click around in here. There's no features to kind of really do much of anything as far as anything really. Let's go into advanced mode and let's see what we can do. Alright, so Armory control interface, you have that. Memory profile, we could do XMP1. Now you do have some memory custom overclocking, which I guess we could do that. Alright, that should give us 2666. As far as anything else, that's pretty much it. Your smart settings, hardware monitor. Now the fan setting that's come with this is actually pretty low, as my fan is only showing 349 RPM. So we're going to have to bump that up just a little bit. But as you can see, our temperatures are already at 46 degrees Celsius. And everything I've read, just learning about this thing tends to overvolt a lot and runs the CPU a lot harder than it needs to be. So a lot of people recommend not doing any overclocking. The way that we would overclock with this would be using the Armory crate or Intel's utility, but it's really not recommended for this motherboard. Now, one thing I'm not liking about this is the whole lack of ability to kind of adjust your fan curve, which I guess it is what it is on that, but ain't no much we can do for that. So as you can see, a lot of the customization options that you would normally have with a motherboard, you don't have it with the BIOS. I've already got it set. I need to install a fresh copy of Windows in here, so let's kind of save changes, exit, reboot, and let's install Windows. When we come back, all right, so I got Windows installed. That went pretty much as planned. Nothing to worry about there as far as this motherboard. And there's already a couple of things that are red flagging me on this motherboard. So now, reading a lot of reviews on it, the biggest thing that people kept on saying is that there's a lack of voltage regulation, which causes the CPU to run hot. Okay, well, I'm looking at the CPU V-core, and I don't know if this comes in the camera, but I've pegged already at 1.4 just sitting at idle. Yep, that's definitely not good. Now, this CPU cooler runs phenomenal. I've used it several times. I used it for the 9700, the 7800, 800 XE, and it maintains temperatures pretty good. Now with this motherboard, like I showed you in the BIOS, there's no provisions to kind of control the fan curve setting. So I'm just kind of running this like right out of the box, stock settings, just as you would buy it. And I think it's pretty interesting that the fan RPM is running low on it, which I'm not a fan of. The voltage is already pegged up to 1.4. Right now we're just sitting at low because we're not doing anything, but if I put a load on it, it runs to 1.408 voltage on it. And my temperatures on idle are about 40, which is okay, but I had a peg to 78 degrees Celsius, and all I was doing was just loading the internet. So now what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to run IATA 64, and we're going to put a stress test on the CPU with this motherboard, and let's see what our voltages go up to and what our temperatures do. I don't have much hope for this one. The test has started. My CPU is pegged at 100%, and my temperatures have spiked up to 88. We're at a minimum 77, 87, so we're in the 80s. And it's only been running for a few seconds, and it's actually a pretty cool day in my garage, so that's actually pretty good. Our voltage is at 1.25, but once again, it had spiked up to 1.408 volts, which is not good. Definitely not good on this one, and not impressive at all. I'm hitting 87, 80, so I'm almost at 90 degrees, and this test has only been running for maybe a minute by now. And this kind of confirms what people have actually read, what I've read from different forums and things I've heard and seen, is that there's lack of voltage control. The voltage on this is all over the place, and in fact, I had it pegged out on core 0 1.5 volts, and I'm getting closer to 1.5 volts. So this motherboard is definitely not one to be trusted and suspicious. So yeah. So let's go ahead and wrap this up. Let's give you a few things to think about with this motherboard. Number one, if you're looking for a motherboard and you run across this on the old eBay, don't buy it, run far from it, and actually pay the seller to keep the motherboard. But anyways, this motherboard, I really don't trust it. And as we saw that our voltages were spiking up to 1.5 volts, and I've really never seen it spike that high with this 8700K running in all stock settings. Another thing too is that as the test kept on running, my power supply fan kept on triggering and just kind of going on, which it's never done that before, even with heavier load CPUs. So definitely something to consider. A lot of people spoke about online saying that this thing has lack of voltage control, which was obvious considering that we pegged out at 1.5 volts. I ran the test several times, and actually this is the first time that I've actually seen it. Now I'm at 1.36 volts. So a few tests before I'm at 1.5 volts, and now I'm at 1.36 volts. So it kind of makes you wonder what in the world, like they say, lack of voltage control, but what in the world is going on with this thing? Now another thing to kind of think about, going through the BIOS, as you saw, there's limited customability in the BIOS, so you really can't do any tweaking as far as your fan curves or anything else. And another thing I saw in the BIOS was that it does not have the ability to enable or disable TPM, which is quite concerning, because if you pay $2,000 for this computer like maybe 3 or 4 years ago, which a 9700 or 8700K is still a viable, very good computer, if you don't have that TPM ability to enable or disable it, my question is will this motherboard support Windows 11? Yes, there's some hack arounds and go arounds for you to do, but something to consider that if somebody who doesn't have any computer experience, how are they going to install Windows 11 if they can't enable TPM? Now I get it, when you buy a pre-built, most people who buy a pre-built are not ones that are extreme enthusiasts who are looking for overclocking or really don't know much about computers. So this would suffice them fine because they don't need the ability to go into the BIOS and kind of do any tweaking or any customization. They just want to get in there and play. And if you want to do any of that, you need to use Armory Crate or some other utilities, which I'm not a fan of because I don't like using any more software than what I need to run my computer. So yeah, definitely something to consider as far as that. So this motherboard, in a nutshell, all this thing is good for me for is just kind of running as a test bench computer. I would not put this in a client's computer by no means, primarily because I don't trust it. It runs hot, lack of voltage control. I don't even want to talk about the overclockingness of it because I have read that people have actually fried their computer and components just trying to overclock this CPU with this motherboard, and yeah, I'm not going to try to fry anything. As far as data transfer, testing graphics cards, and just doing little Mickey Mouse stuff here and there, it's fine. But as far as anybody actually going out looking for this motherboard, if you run across this motherboard on the internet, keep browsing, spend the extra few dollars, and get something that's a lot better, one that you can trust. Asus G15CX, pretty garbage in my opinion. So guys, comment down below, let me know your thoughts on this motherboard. Is anybody using it, and what do you think as far as the TPM ability of it as far as running Windows 11 in the future? It's gonna be kind of depressing that I spent $2,000 on a motherboard that doesn't have support for it. I don't know if it's enabled by default, I don't know if it's disabled by default, and definitely stay tuned because we're probably going to do a test to see if we can install Windows 11 with this motherboard without being able to toggle that feature. So thanks for watching, subscribe if you're not, and as always, we'll see what we come up with next. Off camera, I did a little more testing with it. I did update the BIOS to the latest BIOS. That made no difference as far as the voltage regulation issue with this, and even having the ability for TPM. So we could go ahead and negate the fact that the BIOS were out of date on it. As far as the cooler, I did try a beefier cooler, just kind of, give this motherboard a chance. I tried a Dark Rock Pro 4, and the temperatures that I was seeing was, negligible in difference, maybe a couple of degrees, considering that one has like a 200, I'll post it somewhere, 200 watt TDP, and this is only 105 watts. So yeah, sorry, nothing else I could do to kind of give this motherboard a chance.